In this video, we will learn how to edit text in Dabliu Notes, both from a more traditional perspective of formatting, which we also find on other devices, and also as regards text editing and how the text interacts with Dabliu Notes' artificial intelligence functions. For ease and convenience, I have pasted here a brief descriptive text about Benjamin Franklin. The moment I double tap on the text box, this menu opens up. Within this menu, you will find the option to format the text in Chakrabarde, Karbait, Bolden, Sorekan, Italics, Tan, or as Dade, underlined. Using the preset font sizes, small, medium, and large, as well as the option to create bulleted lists or numbered lists, together with the alignment options, centered, right, left, or fully justified. Now down here, we instead find a few other functions that may be interesting and useful for expanding the text that we have brought into Dabliu Notes. First of all, with a double tap and a drag, I can highlight the text and then apply the functions that I mentioned to you earlier. I tap the light bulb, that is to say the specific function, the icon that activates Dabliu Notes' artificial intelligence feature, and the menu you see here shows everything that I can do with that highlighted portion of text within this app. For example, we could decide to expand this particular text a little bit further. Clearly, when we expand the text, we need to understand exactly which language we are starting from, and also what overall target length we want to reach in the end. Let's say we want the text to end up clearly and noticeably longer than the 6 or 7 lines we copied. I ask the machine to execute this particular command, and here the slightly longer text appears. Now, if I accept this particular change, I simply need to tap just below on Accept. And the text, exactly as it has been modified by the machine, is then imported directly into the box. I tap and drag that small blue dot, and you can then see the entire text, okay? Let's imagine I have a student who has only just arrived in my country and who therefore needs a version of this text in a foreign language, specifically in their own language. In this way, within the Dabliu Notes sharing on his device, he would be able to access the version directly in his own language. Now, the most effective way to do this, I'll just briefly step out of this window for a moment, is to duplicate the page itself. I'm telling you this for a very specific reason. If I tap on this command and enable the thumbnails, I can duplicate the page, okay? And in the shared file, I will then have one page where the text stays in Italian, and a second page, which is the one I have selected at the moment, within which the text can be translated into the language I was referring to. In this way, very clearly, I don't end up missing out on any particular group of students. I start the translation process, and once the system has translated the text into the language that I want, I tap the Accept button and I have the translated text on the whiteboard, so that it can be used on that page by the students I want to work in that specific language. I go back to the Italian version, I tap twice again, and I tap the light bulb icon again, and this time, just as an example, well, in the meantime, I'll show you this. If the text wasn't correct, if the text, for example, had been posted by a student and you wanted to correct it, you could simply tap Correct. But let's say instead that the text is correct. Let's imagine it's slightly longer than this and you want to use it as the basis for creating a quiz. So I tap Create a Quiz. In this case as well, you choose. You can choose the language. So it's interesting because starting from the Italian text, you can select an output language for the quiz that you need, different from Italian. We'll stick with Italian for now. Tap Run and the artificial intelligence shows you a series of questions that are clearly structured around that text. Now, the usefulness of this function, for example, could be to create a more impromptu set of questions to use at the end of an explanation to check immediately, The British call it an exit ticket. How much your students have understood from what you have explained, and how much they have retained from what you have said and read in class. I tap the back arrow to return to the previous functions. And so we have seen translate, we have clearly understood what correct is for, we have tried create a quiz, and initially expand. Now, let us instead put ourselves in the position of a primary school teacher who might want to have her pupils work on a particular historical figure, on a particular topic, but who wants to do so without using vocabulary that is overly complex. In that case, she could use the tell a story function. The tell a story function essentially replaces and transforms the complex text that we have pasted into a simpler, more straightforward story, one that can be understood even by younger pupils. Franklin was an extraordinary man whose life was intertwined with the wonders of science and art. Brought up in a vibrant, ever-changing Philadelphia, his curiosity drove him to explore every aspect of the world around him. It's genuinely quite interesting that we have it readily available, always fully integrated within Dabliu Notes, because what we must never forget is that the entire point of all this is proper, seamless integration within that ecosystem, so we don't actually need to leave it, use other separate apps, get lost along the way, and then come back in again, okay? Something that is absolutely and always entirely and completely fully contained within this software itself. As I was saying, we have a somewhat simpler and more straightforward and certainly easier to follow story, okay, about this character. I'll go back again, and in the event that we had pasted in quite a lengthy text and wanted to present it to the pupils only in fairly broad, more general terms, we could decide to activate the summary mode. And here we have our summary, which, if you count the lines, is more or less roughly about half the length of the original text. Now let's go and take a look at another function. From this particular text, I would like to work with a few specific keywords. So I can ask the artificial intelligence to carefully extract all the specific keywords I need. Now, why exactly could this be interesting for us? Well, for example, once the lesson is completely over, I could ask my students to write a brand new text that must absolutely include the precise words I have listed here. The lesson, in essence, gradually began to take shape almost entirely on its own whilst I was still in the classroom. And so, inevitably, it is extremely interesting to be able to have an output that I can also provide to the students, so that they can work immediately on what was generated in class without having to wait any longer to process the content and thus, so to speak, put a little more distance between the explanation and the setting of the task. I go back, and the very last thing we can do, given a text, is to generate a suitably appropriate title. So I tap Run, the system reviews it once again and says to me, "Excellent, this is the title that really makes sense to include." I've given you a few ideas, but I'm sure that, while I was speaking, you imagined some other ways to use artificial intelligence for text editing on Dabliu Notes. If you would like, write any of these approaches you thought of in the comments. See you next time.